The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla walked through the ancient corridors. Her footsteps echoed softly against the stone floors that had witnessed centuries of royal history. Today felt different somehow, though she couldn't quite place why. The air seemed heavier, filled with an unusual tension that made her feel uneasy. As the newest queen consort, Camilla had grown accustomed to the weight of responsibility that came with her title. But lately, she had noticed strange things happening around the castle. Small items would go missing from her private chambers, only to reappear days later in different locations. At first, she dismissed these incidents as simple forgetfulness on the part of the staff, but the pattern was becoming too frequent to ignore. The crown jewels had always been a source of fascination for visitors and staff alike. These priceless treasures, worth hundreds of millions of pounds, represented not just monetary value but centuries of British heritage. The collection included crowns worn by kings and queens for generations, scepters that had blessed countless ceremonies, and rings that had sealed the fate of nations. Each piece told a story of power, tradition, and the unbroken line of monarchy that stretched back through the ages. Security around these treasures was typically impeccable. Multiple layers of protection surrounded them, from advanced alarm systems to highly trained guards who watched over them day and night. The vault where they were stored was considered one of the most secure locations in all of Britain, rivaling even the Bank of England in its protective measures. Yet recently, even the most experienced security personnel had begun to notice subtle changes in the routine. Thomas Hartwell, the head of royal security, had served the royal family for over 20 years. His keen eye for detail and unwavering dedication had earned him the trust of multiple generations of royals. Lately, however, he found himself staying awake at night, troubled by small inconsistencies he couldn't quite explain. Surveillance cameras would occasionally show brief gaps in footage, always explained away as technical glitches. Access logs would sometimes show entries that didn't match up with the scheduled visits. These minor discrepancies would have been overlooked by most, but Thomas had learned that in security work, the smallest details often revealed the biggest threats. The castle staff had also begun to whisper among themselves. Margaret, the head housekeeper who had worked at the castle for 15 years, noticed that certain areas seemed to be cleaned more frequently than others, as if someone was trying to remove traces of their presence. She mentioned this to her trusted colleague, James, who worked in the gardens and had observed unfamiliar figures near the castle walls during his early morning rounds. Meanwhile, Camilla found herself drawn to the jewelry collection more often than usual. Perhaps it was intuition, or maybe just the natural protective instinct that comes with being responsible for such treasures. She would spend time examining each piece, memorizing their exact placement and condition. The imperial state crown, with its 2,968 diamonds, seemed to call to her particularly. Something about its positioning felt different each time she visited, though she couldn't prove anything was amiss. The atmosphere in the castle grew increasingly tense as autumn approached. Staff members found themselves looking over their shoulders more often, and security protocols were quietly intensified without explanation to the general public. Even the royal corgis seemed more restless than usual, often barking at shadows in corridors where nothing appeared to be wrong. One particular evening, as Camilla was reviewing correspondence in her study, she heard the faint sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. This wasn't unusual in itself, as staff often worked late into the evening. But these footsteps had a different quality to them, more cautious and deliberate than the confident stride of someone going about their legitimate duties. She paused in her reading, straining to listen, but the sounds faded away into the distance. The next morning brought disturbing news from Thomas. During his routine inspection of the jewel vault, he had discovered that the electronic lock had been accessed during the night. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m., a time when no scheduled maintenance or security checks were supposed to take place. More troubling still, the access code used was one that belonged to a staff member who had reportedly been off duty and at home during that time. As word of this incident spread through the inner circle of palace security, it became clear that they were dealing with something far more serious than simple staff negligence. Someone with inside knowledge was operating within the castle walls, someone who understood the security systems well enough to exploit them without triggering immediate alarms. The realization sent a chill through everyone involved in protecting the royal family and their treasures. Camilla received the news with the composure expected of royalty, but inside she felt a mixture of anger and determination. These weren't just valuable objects under threat. They were symbols of her country's heritage, pieces of history that belonged to the British people. The thought that someone would dare to attempt stealing them from under her very nose filled her with a resolve to see that justice was served, no matter who might be involved in this brazen plot. The investigation began immediately, though it had to be conducted with the utmost discretion. Thomas Hartwell assembled a small team of his most trusted security officers, emphasizing that word of the potential threat must not leak beyond this inner circle. The reputation of the royal family and the security of the crown jewels depended on their ability to handle this situation quietly and efficiently. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell from Scotland Yard was called in to assist with the investigation. Her expertise in high-profile theft cases and her security clearance made her the perfect choice for such a sensitive matter. She arrived at the castle early the next morning, dressed in plain clothes to avoid drawing attention from the regular staff who were not yet aware of the situation. Working together, Thomas and Inspector Mitchell began to piece together the timeline of suspicious events. They reviewed weeks of security footage, looking for patterns that might reveal the identity of their target. The process was painstaking, requiring them to examine hours of seemingly normal activity to spot the subtle anomalies that might indicate criminal behavior. During this review, they discovered something alarming. The security footage showed that someone had been systematically studying the daily routines of the guard staff. On multiple occasions, the cameras captured a figure lingering in corridors just long enough to observe shift changes and patrol patterns. The person was always careful to stay in areas where their face couldn't be clearly seen, suggesting they were well aware of camera locations. Queen Camilla insisted on being kept informed of every development in the investigation. Despite the advice of her security team to maintain her normal schedule and let them handle the matter, she found it impossible to continue with routine royal duties while knowing that someone was plotting against the crown jewels. She began to alter her own patterns, making unexpected visits to different parts of the castle at unusual times. The breakthrough came when Margaret, the head housekeeper, approached Thomas with information she had been reluctant to share. She had noticed that one of the junior staff members, David Collins, had been asking unusual questions about the cleaning schedule for the vault area. David had worked at the castle for 3 years and had always seemed trustworthy. But recently his behavior had changed in subtle ways. Margaret explained that David had volunteered for extra shifts that would give him access to areas near the jewel storage, always offering reasonable explanations for why he needed to be there. He had also shown an unexpected interest in the historical significance of various royal artifacts, asking detailed questions about their value and the security measures protecting them. At the time, his curiosity had seemed like genuine professional interest, but in light of recent events, it took on a more sinister meaning. Inspector Mitchell immediately began a background check on David Collins. What she discovered was deeply troubling. David's financial records showed that he had recently accumulated significant gambling debts, owing money to several dangerous individuals. His bank account showed unusual activity, including regular payments to accounts linked to known criminals. Most damning of all, his computer search history revealed extensive research into the international black market for stolen artifacts. The investigation team realized they were dealing with more than just an opportunistic employee trying to steal valuable items. David appeared to be working with an organized criminal network that specialized in high-value thefts. The sophisticated knowledge of the castle's security systems suggested that this plot had been in development for months, possibly even years. Surveillance of David's activities was intensified, but it had to be done carefully to avoid alerting him to the fact that he was under suspicion. Hidden cameras were installed in areas where he frequently worked, and his communications were monitored. The goal was to gather enough evidence to not only stop the theft, but also to identify and arrest his criminal associates. During this period of intense surveillance, Queen Camilla made a decision that surprised her security team. Rather than retreating to safer areas of the castle, she announced her intention to personally oversee the protection of the crown jewels. This wasn't just about the monetary value of the items, she explained, but about preserving the symbols of British monarchy for future generations. Thomas tried to dissuade her from this course of action, explaining that it could put her in danger if the criminals became desperate. But Camilla was determined, pointing out that as queen consort she had a duty to protect these treasures just as previous royals had done throughout history. Her resolve reminded everyone present of the courage that had always been a hallmark of the British royal family. As the surveillance continued, the team discovered that David had been sharing information about castle security with his criminal contacts through encrypted messaging apps. He had photographed security protocols, mapped out guard patrol routes, and even managed to obtain temporary access codes that would allow entry to restricted areas. The scope of his betrayal was breathtaking, representing a security breach that could have had consequences far beyond the theft of jewels. The pressure was mounting on all sides. The criminal network was clearly preparing to make their move, while the security team was racing to gather enough evidence to stop them. Queen Camilla found herself at the center of this dangerous game, knowing that her beloved crown jewels and the security of the monarchy itself hung in the balance. The next few days would determine whether centuries of royal heritage would be protected or fall victim to an elaborate criminal conspiracy. The tension in Windsor Castle reached a breaking point when intercepted communications revealed that the theft was planned for the following weekend. The criminal network had chosen this timing carefully, knowing that several senior security personnel would be off duty for a scheduled training exercise. David Collins had provided this information to his associates, not knowing that every message was being monitored by Inspector Mitchell's team. Queen Camilla was briefed on the intelligence immediately. The plan, as far as they could determine, involved David disabling certain security systems from the inside while a team of professional thieves gained access through a service entrance that he would unlock. The criminals intended to focus on the most valuable and portable pieces from the crown jewels collection, items that could be easily transported and sold on the black market, rather than simply arrest David and hope to prevent the theft. Inspector Mitchell proposed a more ambitious plan. They would allow the criminals to believe their operation was proceeding as planned, while actually controlling every aspect of the situation. This would enable them to catch not only David, but the entire criminal network, ensuring that no one escaped to plan future attacks on royal properties. Thomas was initially resistant to this approach, concerned about the risks involved in allowing criminals to get so close to the crown jewels. However, he was persuaded by the argument that catching the entire network was the only way to ensure the long-term security of the royal treasures. Half measures would only delay the threat, not eliminate it entirely. The preparation for this elaborate sting operation required careful coordination between multiple agencies. Special forces units were positioned around the castle perimeter, ready to move in once the criminals revealed themselves. The crown jewels were secretly replaced with expertly crafted replicas, so realistic that even close examination wouldn't immediately reveal the deception. The real treasures were moved to a secure location, known only to the highest levels of the security team. Queen Camilla played a crucial role in maintaining the appearance of normalcy during this tense preparation period. She continued with her scheduled public appearances and royal duties, giving no sign that anything unusual was happening at the castle. Her performance was so convincing that even some of the castle staff remained unaware that a major security operation was underway. David Collins, meanwhile, continued his normal work routine while secretly preparing for the heist. Hidden cameras captured him conducting final reconnaissance of the areas where the theft would take place. He was observed making small adjustments to security equipment, changes that would appear accidental, but would actually create the vulnerabilities his criminal associates needed to succeed. The weekend of the planned theft arrived with an unusual autumn storm that provided perfect cover for the operation. The heavy rain and strong winds would mask any sounds made by the intruders, while the reduced visibility would help them avoid detection by external security cameras. David had clearly passed this weather information to his associates, as intercepted communications showed they were pleased with the conditions. As evening fell on Saturday, Queen Camilla was quietly moved to a secure location within the castle, despite her protests that she wanted to remain close to the action. Thomas insisted that her safety was paramount, and that her presence near the jewel vault could complicate the operation if something went wrong. Reluctantly, she agreed to watch the events unfold through secure video feeds from a command center that had been established in the castle's basement. The first sign that the operation was beginning came at 11:30 p.m., when David Collins was observed making his final preparations. He systematically disabled several alarm sensors, following a sequence that had clearly been planned well in advance. His actions were smooth and confident, suggesting that he had practiced this routine multiple times. Unknown to him, every move was being recorded by backup security systems that he didn't know existed. At exactly midnight, 3 figures approached the castle through the gardens, moving with the practiced stealth of experienced criminals. They wore dark clothing and carried professional burglary equipment, including electronic devices designed to defeat sophisticated security systems. The storm provided excellent cover for their approach, just as they had planned. David met the intruders at the designated service entrance, greeting them with quiet efficiency that spoke of prior meetings and careful planning. The group consisted of 2 men and 1 woman, all appearing to be in their 30s or 40s with the physical fitness and alertness that suggested military or law enforcement backgrounds. This wasn't a group of amateur thieves, but professional criminals who specialized in high-value targets. Inspector Mitchell watched the scene unfold from the command center, coordinating with the various teams positioned around the castle. The timing had to be perfect. They needed to allow the criminals to incriminate themselves fully, while ensuring that no real damage was done to the castle or its contents. Too early, and they wouldn't have enough evidence for prosecution. Too late, and they risked losing control of the situation. The criminals moved through the castle with surprising confidence, following routes that David had obviously provided to them in advance. They avoided areas where guards were stationed and moved through corridors where their presence wouldn't immediately trigger alarms. Their knowledge of the castle's layout was impressively detailed, demonstrating just how thoroughly David had betrayed the trust placed in him. As they approached the vault containing the crown jewels, Queen Camilla found herself holding her breath despite knowing that the real treasures were safely secured elsewhere. Watching these criminals violate the sanctity of her home filled her with a cold anger that surprised her with its intensity. These weren't just thieves after valuable objects. They were attacking the very foundation of the monarchy and the British heritage it represented. The criminals reached the vault containing the crown jewels at 12:45 a.m., moving with practiced precision through the castle's ancient corridors. David Collins used his access codes to disable the remaining security systems, his hands shaking slightly as the magnitude of his betrayal became real. The electronic locks clicked open with soft beeps that seemed impossibly loud in the hushed atmosphere of the castle. Inside the command center, Inspector Mitchell gave the signal to her teams positioned throughout the building. The plan was to allow the thieves to handle the replica jewels, gathering irrefutable evidence of their criminal intent before moving in for the arrests. Special Forces units quietly took their positions, ready to seal off all escape routes when the order came. Queen Camilla watched the monitors with growing anxiety as the criminals entered the sacred space where the crown jewels were displayed. Even though she knew these were replicas, seeing strangers handle these symbols of royal authority felt like watching a violation of everything she held dear. The lead criminal, a tall man with scarred hands, reached for the imperial state crown with casual disregard for its significance. The woman in the group appeared to be the technical expert, using sophisticated scanning equipment to verify the authenticity of the pieces they were stealing. This device would have detected real gemstones and precious metals, but the replicas had been crafted specifically to fool such instruments. The criminals had no idea they were stealing worthless copies while the real treasures remained safely hidden. David Collins stood guard at the entrance to the vault, his nervousness becoming more apparent as the operation continued. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air, and he constantly checked his watch as if afraid that dawn would arrive before they could complete their theft. His criminal associates worked with cold efficiency, selecting the most valuable and portable pieces from the collection. The breakthrough moment came when the woman activated a communication device to contact their getaway team. Inspector Mitchell's electronics specialist had been waiting for this, immediately tracing the signal to identify the locations of additional criminals waiting outside the castle grounds. This was the evidence they needed to prove the existence of a larger criminal network and to justify a major operation to round up all the participants. As the thieves carefully packed the replica crown jewels into specially designed carrying cases, Queen Camilla made a decision that shocked everyone in the command center. Despite explicit instructions to remain in the secure location, she quietly left the basement and began making her way toward the vault. Her security detail, caught off guard by this unexpected move, scrambled to follow her while maintaining radio silence to avoid alerting the criminals. Thomas Hartwell nearly suffered heart failure when he realized that the Queen was moving through the castle while armed criminals were still at large. He immediately dispatched additional guards to intercept her, but Camilla had spent months learning the castle's layout and knew passages that even some of the security team hadn't discovered. Her determination to personally confront those who dared threaten the crown jewels overrode all concerns for her own safety. Meanwhile, the criminals completed their selection of replica jewels and prepared to leave the vault. The tall man with scarred hands carried the case containing the imperial state crown, while his female accomplice took a collection of ceremonial rings and smaller pieces. David Collins nervously urged them to hurry, aware that they had been in the castle longer than originally planned. The first sign that something was wrong came when the woman's scanning equipment began giving inconsistent readings on some of the pieces they had stolen. The replicas were extremely sophisticated, but under intense scrutiny, tiny differences in density and composition became apparent. She whispered her concerns to her male colleague, who immediately became more alert and suspicious. At that exact moment, Queen Camilla emerged from a side corridor just 20 feet from the vault entrance. She had taken a route that bypassed the areas where Inspector Mitchell's teams were positioned, putting herself in direct confrontation with the criminals before anyone could stop her. The sight of the Queen Consort appearing like a ghost in the dimly lit hallway stunned everyone present. David Collins was the first to react, his face going white with terror as he realized that his carefully planned operation had been discovered. The presence of the Queen herself meant that the highest levels of security were aware of the theft, and that his hopes of escaping undetected were now impossible. His hand moved instinctively toward a concealed weapon, a movement that did not go unnoticed by the professional criminals beside him. The tall man immediately recognized the danger of the situation. Having the Queen as a witness to their crime would bring the full force of British law enforcement down upon them, making escape virtually impossible. He quickly calculated their options while keeping his voice calm and controlled, trying to prevent panic from destroying their chance of getting out of the castle alive. Queen Camilla stood perfectly still, her royal training taking over in this moment of crisis. She showed no fear despite being confronted by armed criminals in the middle of the night, instead projecting the authority and dignity that had been bred into the royal family over generations. Her presence transformed the situation from a simple theft into a direct challenge to the crown itself. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours to everyone involved. Inspector Mitchell's voice crackled through radio communications as she realized that the Queen was in immediate danger, and that the carefully planned operation had suddenly become a hostage situation. Special Forces units began moving toward the vault, but they had to approach carefully to avoid triggering violence that could endanger the Queen's life. In that tense moment, as criminals faced royalty in the ancient halls of Windsor Castle, it became clear that this confrontation would determine not just the fate of the crown jewels, but the safety of the Queen herself and the reputation of everyone responsible for protecting the royal family. The confrontation in the castle corridor lasted mere moments, but those seconds would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. Queen Camilla stood with remarkable composure, her years of royal training evident in every aspect of her bearing. She looked directly at the criminals, showing no fear despite being outnumbered and facing people who had already demonstrated their willingness to break the law. The tall criminal with scarred hands was the first to speak, his voice low and controlled as he assessed this unexpected development. He understood immediately that having the Queen as a witness changed everything about their situation. No longer was this a simple theft that might be handled quietly. This had become an incident that would involve the highest levels of government and law enforcement. David Collins seemed paralyzed by the appearance of Queen Camilla, his face reflecting the horror of seeing his betrayal exposed in the most dramatic way possible. The magnitude of his actions hit him fully as he realized he was not just a thief, but someone who had put the Queen herself in danger. His hands trembled as he struggled to decide whether to flee or surrender. The female criminal, meanwhile, had quickly activated a backup communication device, trying to alert their outside associates that the operation had been compromised. However, Inspector Mitchell's technical team had been monitoring all radio frequencies and immediately jammed the signal, preventing any coordination with external accomplices. The thieves were now truly isolated within the castle walls. Queen Camilla chose this moment to speak, her voice carrying the authority that came with decades of public service and royal responsibility. She addressed the criminals directly, not as a victim pleading for mercy, but as a sovereign defending her realm. Her words were carefully chosen, designed to maintain dignity while also buying time for the security forces to reach her location. She told the thieves that they were in possession of items that belonged not just to her personally, but to the British people and to history itself. These weren't mere valuable objects, she explained, but symbols of continuity and tradition that had been passed down through generations. By attempting to steal them, they were attacking the very foundation of British heritage and culture. The response of the criminals to this unexpected lecture revealed much about their characters and motivations. The tall man remained focused on practical concerns, calculating how to escape from an increasingly dangerous situation. The woman seemed genuinely surprised by the Queen's composure, perhaps having expected tears or panic rather than this display of royal authority. David Collins appeared close to collapse, overwhelmed by guilt and fear. Behind the scenes, Inspector Mitchell was coordinating a complex response to this crisis. Special forces units were moving into position throughout the castle, but they had to approach carefully to avoid triggering a violent reaction from the criminals. The priority was ensuring the Queen's safety above all else, even if it meant allowing some of the thieves to initially escape. Thomas Hartwell had reached a state of barely controlled panic as he realized that his worst nightmare was unfolding. The Queen was in direct danger. The crown jewels had been compromised, and the entire security system he had spent years developing was being tested in the most dramatic way possible. He coordinated with Inspector Mitchell to ensure that every possible escape route was covered while avoiding actions that might endanger the Queen. The breakthrough came when Queen Camilla noticed something that the criminals had missed in their focus on the immediate situation. Through a window at the end of the corridor, she could see lights moving in the castle gardens, the special forces teams taking their positions. Rather than revealing this information directly, she subtly shifted her position to block the criminals' view of the window, preventing them from seeing the approaching reinforcements. This small act of courage and quick thinking provided the opening that the security forces needed. While the criminals remained focused on the Queen and their stolen goods, they were unaware that their escape routes were being systematically cut off. The operation was entering its final phase, with success or failure depending on the next few minutes. The tension reached its peak when the female criminal's equipment finally confirmed what she had begun to suspect. The jewels they had stolen were not authentic. The revelation that they had been manipulated and were carrying worthless replicas sent a shock through the group. They realized they had walked into a trap, and that their careful planning had been anticipated and countered at every step. David Collins completely broke down at this revelation, falling to his knees as he understood that his betrayal had been discovered long before the theft attempt. His criminal associates looked at him with disgust and anger, realizing that their inside information had been compromised, and that they were now facing capture with nothing to show for their risks. Queen Camilla used this moment of confusion and recrimination among the thieves to take a small step backward, creating distance between herself and the criminals. Her movement was subtle but deliberate, positioning herself closer to the corridor that led back toward the areas where her security team was located. Every inch of distance she could create might prove crucial in the coming moments. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the stone corridors of the castle, growing louder with each passing second. The criminals realized that their time had run out, and that they would soon be surrounded by armed security forces. The moment of decision had arrived. They could surrender peacefully or attempt a desperate escape that would likely end in violence and capture. The final moments of the confrontation unfolded with dramatic swiftness, as the approaching footsteps grew louder in the castle corridors. Royal Guard Captain James Morrison appeared at the far end of the hallway, his weapon drawn but pointed safely toward the floor. Behind him came Inspector Mitchell and Thomas Hartwell, followed by additional security personnel who had finally reached the Queen's location. The sight of armed guards approaching caused immediate panic among the criminals. The female thief dropped her equipment and raised her hands, recognizing that resistance would be futile. The tall man with scarred hands hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting between the queen, the approaching guards, and the carrying case containing the replica crown jewels that he still clutched desperately. David Collins had already collapsed completely, sitting on the stone floor with his head in his hands as the full weight of his actions crashed down upon him. The betrayal of his position, the endangering of the queen, and the failure of the elaborate criminal plan had broken his spirit entirely. He made no attempt to flee or resist as the guards surrounded the group. Captain Morrison moved with practiced precision, his years of training evident in every controlled movement. He positioned himself between the criminals and Queen Camilla, ready to shield her from any desperate action the thieves might attempt. His calm but authoritative voice filled the corridor as he ordered the criminals to drop their weapons and lie face down on the floor. Queen Camilla remained remarkably composed throughout these tense final moments, her royal training serving her well even in this extraordinary situation. She stepped back to give the security forces room to work, but refused to flee from the scene despite urgent requests from her protection detail. Her presence served as a powerful reminder of what these criminals had dared to attack, not just valuable objects, but the very symbols of British sovereignty. The surrender of the criminals proceeded smoothly once they realized that escape was impossible. The sophisticated security operation had anticipated their every move, and they were completely surrounded within the ancient walls of Windsor Castle. One by one, they complied with the guards' commands, lying flat on the stone floor as handcuffs were applied and their stolen goods secured. Inspector Mitchell immediately took charge of processing the scene, ensuring that every piece of evidence was properly documented and preserved. The replica crown jewels were carefully examined and photographed, providing crucial proof of the criminals' intent, even though the real treasures had never been in danger. The sophisticated equipment they had brought would serve as additional evidence of the premeditated nature of their crime. Thomas Hartwell's relief at seeing Queen Camilla safe was evident in his expression, though he knew that serious questions would be raised about how the security situation had been allowed to develop to this point. The successful capture of the criminals would not completely overshadow the fact that the Queen had been placed in direct danger, something that should never have been possible under proper security protocols. As the criminals were led away under heavy guard, Queen Camilla finally allowed herself to show some reaction to the night's events. The adrenaline that had sustained her composure began to fade, and she accepted the support of Captain Morrison as they made their way back to the secure areas of the castle. The ordeal was over, but its implications would be felt for months to come. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of the criminal conspiracy. David Collins' cooperation with authorities, motivated by his complete breakdown and desire for leniency, provided detailed information about the international network that had planned the theft. His gambling debts had made him vulnerable to recruitment, and his inside access to the castle had made him an invaluable asset to the criminals. The three professional thieves were identified as members of a sophisticated criminal organization that specialized in high-value cultural artifacts. Their previous targets had included museums, private collections, and historic sites across Europe. The Windsor Castle operation was to have been their most ambitious theft, with the crown jewels representing a prize worth hundreds of millions of pounds on the black market. In the weeks that followed, additional arrests were made as the investigation expanded to include the criminals' associates and support network. The communication intercepts and surveillance evidence gathered during the operation led to the dismantling of a significant portion of the international art theft ring, dealing a major blow to this type of organized crime. Queen Camilla's role in the successful resolution of the case was kept largely confidential, but within royal circles her courage and quick thinking were widely praised. Her decision to personally confront the thieves while dangerous had provided crucial intelligence that helped ensure their capture. More importantly, her dignity under pressure had upheld the honor of the monarchy during a serious crisis. The security improvements implemented following the incident included enhanced background screening for all castle staff, upgraded electronic surveillance systems, and revised protocols for protecting both the royal family and the crown jewels. David Collins' betrayal had exposed vulnerabilities that required immediate attention, leading to the most comprehensive security overhaul in the castle's modern history. The crown jewels themselves were returned to their proper place with enhanced protection measures, their safety assured by the lessons learned from this dramatic attempt at theft. The successful defense of these priceless symbols of British heritage demonstrated that even in an age of sophisticated criminal organizations, the determination to protect national treasures could triumph over greed and betrayal. The case became a confidential legend within security circles, studied as an example of how proper planning, technological resources, and royal courage could combine to protect irreplaceable cultural heritage from those who would steal it for personal gain.